Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. A warm welcome to this second webinar on the India Research Management Initiative, or IRMI. A few housekeeping matters before we get started. This webinar will be recorded, and you can ask questions anytime during the session by typing in the questions box. Today we have a guest speaker with us, and it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Simon Kerridge. He's the Director of Research Services at the University of Kent in the UK. He's a very experienced research manager himself and is also the principal investigator on a major global survey on research administration as a profession. So today it's wonderful for us to have Simon Kerridge here with us. He's going to tell us about research management, about the survey, and share a few thoughts on research management as a profession and how research management can support research institutions. So Simon, welcome to the webinar, and I'm just going to hand over to you, and I think we can swap our presentations.
Thanks very much, Savita. Let's hope the technology works. Thank you for the introduction. I like the way you called me experienced, and I know what you really mean is old.
That's a matter of opinion, yes.
Well, I don't know. Every day I seem to be older than I was the previous day. So we're still waiting for the technology handover, I think. Aha, and here we go. Okay, so hopefully you now have on your screens my opening presentation.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, sorry about all the information on here. I do have sort of a Twitter handle, and you can find out information from the various links and so on. I don't think I put my email on, but you can find that fairly easily if anyone does want to contact me afterwards. So, what am I going to talk about? Of course, I'm going to talk about me. I think, morally obliged to talk about my institution, but I'll keep it short. I'll talk about the fantastically acronymed RAP, Research Administration as a Profession survey, as Savita says. I'll talk a tiny bit about IRMI, the UK Association of Research Managers and Administrators, and I'll also show you the office structure for research services here in Kent, and then time for questions or whatever Savita would like us to do. So here is me. We don't have a webcam, so I'm pretty sure everyone will recognize me in the top corner. Some people say that that's not me and it's Daniel Craig and that I look more like this. If you meet me in person, you probably realize I look more like that. So yes, I've got 25 years of experience as being a research manager and administrator. My doctorate is also in research management as well, so that makes me a little bit unique or possibly weird. I've been involved in a number of national things, for example, the Metric Tide reports, which has had quite a lot of influence in terms of using metrics or not using metrics to assess research. And I have a number of board positions. As Savita said, I'm the previous past chair of IRMI, the UK Association. I'm also on the European Association of Research Managers and Administrators, and I chair their awards committee. The only other thing I'll pick out from this list here is the Journal of Research Management and Administration, JORMA. So yes, you can write about research management if you're currently a researcher and feel like you need to keep your research mojo going. So here is the obligatory slide about the University of Kent. It's a university. So what else did you need to know? More importantly, what is a research manager and administrator? There has been some research done into the definitions because it's a newish profession and the scope changes and is perceived slightly differently in different regions and different countries. Probably my favourite definition is the one by Julie Stackhouse from the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Research management administration embraces anything that universities can do to maximise the impact of their research activity. It includes assistance in identifying new sources of funding, presenting research applications, advice on costing projects, negotiating contracts with external sponsors. It also incorporates project management and financial control systems. It helps in exploiting research results through commercialization, knowledge exchange, and dissemination to the wider societies. So that's sort of scholarly communication side of things. So because there wasn't a huge definition of that, that's what led on to the RAP project, which I'll mention in a minute. But here is a slightly easier sort of list, if you like, of what research managers and administrators do. We help academics develop proposals. We help them through the lifetime of that project. We help them during the project and after the project to translate the findings of their research. Some are also involved in postgraduate research student administration. We also look after research policy and governance, management information, so research information management systems. We are also sometimes the bad guy and have to do audit and compliance support. Of course, we organize our own office as well, and we also do quite a lot on communication and training. Okay, so RAP. In 2016, we ran a large survey. We got 2,691 responses from around the world, and I'll share a bit more detail on that later on. But we basically asked research managers and administrators, what is your role? What do you do? What skills and competencies do you have in terms of technical skills and softer skills? And what are your demographics? How old are you? Where did you sort of come from? What in terms of your academic background? So that was a huge survey, 80 questions or so. This year, 2019, we're running a follow-on survey where we retain the information about your role and the demographics, but we've taken out the skills and competencies, which was a large part, and this part we're asking about research impact, which is becoming quite important in a number of countries. You can see there in the center of the diagram of the slide the web reference for the survey. The RAP2 survey is currently open, and if you feel that you do some research management and or administration as part of your role at the moment, please do fill in the survey. It would be really very useful. So yeah, INOMS RAP2 on Bitly. So here's the small amount of data from RAP1. You can see the various countries of the world where we got some responses from. You'll notice not a huge number from India there, or rather slightly less than one. That would be none. But we are hoping for some this year. Indeed, we already have some, I'm sure. So big findings. If you look on the left-hand side here, you can see the hard skills. So that's technical skills like costing and pricing, like audit. And on the right-hand side here, softer skills like communication and collaboration. The yellow part here is, this is extremely important for my role, very important in purple. Yes, a little bit important. And so you can see that this highly important part for the role is much more prominent in the softer skills than the technical skills. So technical skills are important, but those sort of softer, more transferable skills are even more important. Just some very tiny, quick highlights. Do you, as a research manager administrator, do you have a doctorate? Do you have a master's, or do you have a bachelor's degree? And you can see that 2/3 of us have masters or more. So we tend to be fairly academically well endowed, shall I say. What subject areas do you come from? So it's across the board. So science, medicine, engineering, business, social sciences, humanities, arts, general, and wasn't quite sure about your taxonomy, Simon. I came from somewhere else. So you can see it's a broad spectrum. Okay, so there is plenty more about the survey results. You can find all the links on most of these slides. So I'll skip now to what might an association do. So IRMI, the UK Association, is about 27 years old now. We have around 3,000 members, having started from about 5 members. So it's grown over time because we really have this sort of a sense of community. We share best practice in terms of supporting academic staff. We have an annual conference. The next one is in June. You're very welcome, but you might be more interested in attending the international Congress of INORMS, which is the umbrella association, which is in Hiroshima next year, and I think Savita will talk more about that. But we have a lot of professional development activities, so seminars, special interest groups, study tours to funders, as I say, mentoring, and various publications about what are people doing and how can you share that best practice. But probably for me, the most important part is this peer support network. So to wrap up with, here is what my office looked like. It's actually about 9 months old now, but in terms of the structure, so we have a group of people who look after funding, so helping academics find that funding that they might want to apply for. We have a group of people here who look after the actually helping putting that proposal in and doing the costing and pricing and doing the contract negotiation. And then we have the post-award team here who look after the reporting of the finances and making sure things are spent according to the funder rules, ethics and governance. And then we have also research system support, and we have a research excellence team here who look after a national funding program that we have every 7 years or so. So that's kind of the broad range of it. So helping academics apply for, or indeed persuading them they might want to apply for, because there are some barriers to that, helping them with the proposal, helping them spend the money, making sure they spend it ethically, and then telling other people about it after they spent it. You'll see the key at the top here, so I just thought it might be interesting for you to know that these people here moved into their jobs from somewhere else in the sector, a research management administration position elsewhere. This person moved from somewhere else in Kent, so they had some of the departments have research management support locally. This is just the central team. These ones moved from within research services, so that was an internal promotion. The green people here were research managers but working in funders, because we also include people working in funders as research managers and administrators. The purple people here moved from other university administration roles. The red ones were previously researchers and moved into research administration, and that tends to be quite common for the people who are working more closely with the academics in terms of helping them with the proposal and the costing and pricing, because they have that expertise and they can understand the subject area. The post-award people quite often have moved from a finance role, and that's what we see here. And then we get people who've moved elsewhere, so maybe from the NHS or from charities or whatever. So that's probably all I wanted to say. There again is the survey link. Please do fill it in. I will be eternally grateful. And if we get more than no responses from India, I shall be very happy. But I think that's all I wanted to say. So if I'm clever, I will see if I can hand back the screen. Okay. How is that? Have you got the screen back or not? Nope. I haven't managed to hand back the screen. Change presenter. There we go. Savita. Yes. Sorry about that slight glitch there. So I think you have the screen back, Savita? Yes.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'm just waiting for the screen to come back at my end.
Okay, I can see it at my end.
Yes.
A real picture of me. Shame.
Thank you very much, Simon, for your presentation. So now I'd just like to talk a little bit about IRMI, the India Research Management Initiative. IRMI started off as a pilot project which ran through 2018, and during the course of IRMI, we interacted with nearly 40 institutions across India. The goal of the IRMI pilot was to raise awareness about research management as a profession, as a support service, and to gather information on gaps in the system. So based on what we encountered during the pilot phase, the India Alliance have now rolled out a new phase for IRMI, which is a 5-year phase, and this was launched in October this year. So there is a new strategic plan for IRMI, which is available on the India Alliance website. And in brief, there are 4 priorities for IRMI through the next 5 years. The first priority is supporting research centers in India to strengthen their research management services. The second priority is to support training, career development, and networking opportunities for research managers and administrators. The third priority is building national and international partnerships for knowledge and resource exchange, because just as science and research are global activities, research management is also a research activity. And there's much we can learn and contribute to the field all across the world. The fourth priority is actually creating a community of practice. So you heard Simon speak about IRMI, the UK Association for Research Managers and Administrators. So creating a community of practice in India through IRMI is the first step towards having a formal association in place, but we hope that the activities will help to bind us together towards a common cause. So to look at some of these priorities in a little bit more detail, the first priority, which is to support research centers in India to strengthen the research management services available. And the India Alliance are going to do this in a couple of different ways. The first way in which this will be done is through a new research management fellowship. And here the focus is on grant management through all stages of the funding cycle. The second way in which the India Alliance will support this activity is through the provision of research management institutional grants. And this could be to come up for institutions to come up with additional elements that augment the scope of their central research office, or to create novel research management solutions, or indeed to create new research management resources for India. And throughout the next 5-year period, there will be various workshops, which will be opportunities for institutions to interact with each other and to learn from each other. So a little bit now about the two grants, the research management fellowships and the institutional grants. The deadline is approaching soon. The deadline is November 30th. So the first step in this is we're requesting institutions to register with IRMI through the institutional registration form. This is available, the forms are available online through the IRMI website. So we do require this. It's a prerequisite for applying for any funding through these two schemes. The IRMI Research Management Fellowships are intended as a combined mentor fellowship and institutional strengthening program. And so host institutions will be expected to identify and nominate individuals to these fellowships, and the focus will be on grant management at all stages of the funding cycle. And the host institution will need to commit to employing the research management fellow for the full duration of the fellowship. Now, in terms of provisions, the RM Fellowship is a full-time fellowship for 3 years, and during this period, the India Alliance will provide rupees 6 lakhs in funding support, which can be used towards salary support, research office support, or other justified costs for the research management fellow. There will also be training provided in pre and post-award grant management and more general research office processes over a 6-month period. And there will be an allied institutional strengthening program aimed at supporting the host institution so that they can assess the efficacy of the research office. And needless to say, all research management fellows appointed through this route will be part of a growing network of IRMI research managers. And so they will not only have access, but they'll be expected to fully participate in all of the IRMI events. The other kind of grant are the institutional grants. And as I said, these could be used flexibly in a variety of ways. They could be used to augment existing services, centralized services. They could be used for creating new resources. They could be used for hosting workshops in the field of research management. And here the India Alliance will provide up to rupees 10 lakhs towards all justified costs for this particular resource or solution. And again, any research management staff hired through the grant will be part of the IRMI network. So a few key points about the RM fellowships and the institutional grants. The application submission deadline is 30th November. and decision on applications are expected around in February or March next year. Institutional registration is a prerequisite. We've had several queries in this regard, but this is a prerequisite. Even institutions that registered with the IRMI pilot will need to register again this year. The India Alliance will only consider applications from not-for-profit institutions supporting biomedical research, and the training for the RM fellows will be offered via a combination of modes. We've had a question about sustainability for the resource beyond the end of the grant, and yes, the institution will need to have a sustainability plan in place for the end of the grant. So moving on to the second strategic priority, which is supporting training, career development, and networking opportunities for research managers. So as we've already been through a description of the research management fellowships that is intended to provide mentorship to a group of individuals appointed to those roles. In addition, there will be other training webinars and other opportunities. The India Alliance will be administering an international travel award, which I will talk about briefly soon. And through the IRMI network, we will also disseminate information on emerging research management roles in India. So the travel awards for this year are intended to support research managers wanting to attend the INOMS 2020 conference, which will be held in Hiroshima next year. This scheme is now closed, and we've received applications to this scheme, and the India Alliance are no longer accepting any further applications to these travel award scheme. As I said, one of the key goals of IRMI over the next 5 years is actually creating a community of practice for the research managers. This is intended as an enabling peer group where research managers can learn from each other, can share with each other. And so to this end, we've already started the process. We would like to create and manage an IRMI membership network. And here we are requesting individuals to actually register with IRMI for the individual part of it. Again, there is a specific individual registration form, which is available on the India Alliance website. So please do complete that form, because it allows us to gather basic information about your expertise and your interests. And those who are part of the IRMI network are also on a mailing list. And so there will be various communications sent out to the mailing list, but this mailing list and the IRMI network is intended for individuals who are in research management roles. And here we are open to having research managers who work in the for-profit sector. However, grant applications to the India Alliance can only be supported from not-for-profit organizations. So as I mentioned, we have now created a jobs database, and these are the first 2 job postings on the database, and we hope to see this grow. So there are several purposes, or this database is intended for several reasons. The first is, of course, disseminating information on what jobs are coming up all across the country. So this could be quite useful for the community. So if you're based, for example, in Kolkata and are contemplating moving to Hyderabad and are looking for a research management job, then the portal here might be of use for you. And we also hope that the portal will be helpful for the community to understand the different kinds of RM roles that are coming up all across India. We will also be coming up with volunteering opportunities where there will be specific calls issued through the mailing list. And this will be for the creation of small working groups who will be working towards some specific task for the benefit of the community. And one of the volunteering opportunities that will arise is that through the IRMI network, we hope to have annual conferences for all members of the IRMI network. So that will be a great time for all members of the network to get together. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done in putting an annual conference together. So that is an example of a volunteering opportunity. But please be part of the network. Please be part of the mailing list, and these expressions of interest will be sent out through the mailing list. And so to summarize, there are 4 strategic priorities for IRMI during the next 5 years, and the India Alliance will provide funding support and various other opportunities, both for institutions and individuals. And institutions willing to apply for funding or willing to engage with IRMI will need to register by filling out the form. And likewise, individuals wishing to join the network will also need to register. All the application forms are available online through the IRMI web pages on the India Alliance website. And please follow the communications from the India Alliance for all specific training and networking opportunities. You can follow the India Alliance and the IRMI initiative on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and through all of the different modes of communication from the India Alliance. So that's my presentation on IRMI. And at this point, be happy to take some questions. So there's a question on, are health NGOs eligible for IRMI fellowships? Health NGOs could be eligible for hosting the fellowship, provided they are not for profit and they support some activity in the area of biomedical research, and they are able to sign up to the India Alliance grant conditions for all the funding. And details of that are available on the website. There's a question on how do we get access to the application form or link for applying for the IRMI institutional grant after institute registration. Well, if you look at the IRMI website, where there is a detailing of the institutional grants, there will be a link available there to actually apply for the institutional grant. Still waiting for some more questions to come in. Would you be able to share the slides at the end of the session? Well, the webinar is recorded and we will be making the webinar available.
Just on that, Savita, I'm happy for my slides to be distributed further if that's useful.
Thank you so much, Simon. How will research managers have sustainability? This is a matter for the institution to consider. Institutional resources will need to be made available for the research office.
Would you like me to comment on that?
Yes, please, Simon. That would be very helpful, actually.
So in the UK, our costings of projects include indirect costs, and so the indirect costs are anything else which the university needs to incur to be a university. So, for example, the HR department, the finance department, the IT department, who are there to support both the teaching and the research. So there's a calculation done to work out what our total indirect costs are, and for each application we make externally, we add on the appropriate amount of indirect costs. So the research office is an indirect cost, which is wholly attributable to research, and so that is part of that element. So if we are able to recover those full costs, then the research office is paid for as part of each and every research project. We also have some core research funding in the UK to support our own research activities, and some of that is used to support the research office as well. So yes, it's up to the institution to decide how to do that, and some institutions say, well, what we want to do is invest in a larger central research support service in order to increase our external funding. So if you like, we gamble on getting more research by investing in being able to get that research. So perhaps the research office might pay for itself in 2 or 3 years' time in terms of more research grants coming in. The problem is where most of your research comes from funders, for example, the Gates Foundation or the Wellcome Trust, where they don't pay any indirect costs, and a number of charities don't do that. And so most universities have to have a portfolio of research activities which include those funders which will pay for some of those indirect costs. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Simon. Maybe we'll just wait a bit for any further questions. Simon, maybe I can, while we're waiting for questions to come in, I could just ask you to talk a little bit about IRMI. You know, you mentioned that IRMI has grown over a period of several decades from a very small number of people. Would you like to tell us actually, how did research management actually arise in the world? And, you know, also comment about the growth of IRMI, how this has happened.
Sure. How did it start in the world? Goodness me. Actually, going back historically, just towards the end of the Second World War, in America, there was a, you know, how do we increase our technology? How do we move forward on after this war? And so there was more funding put into research, and at that time there were researchers who were basically having to handle this funding, and so they decided that really, well, not they decided, but you know, some of them got some additional support to help them do that. So the oldest association in the world is NCURA, the US National Council of University Research Administrators, which celebrated its 60th anniversary last year, and it so basically it started then in the US. In the UK, we started IRMI. I say we, I wasn't involved immediately. We started IRMI in 1991, and it grew out of social science research centres. So there was some funding put into social science, and quite a lot of universities decided that actually they would have that as a sort of a separate institute, and so the institute had to be sort of self-supporting, so they needed to provide that central institutional resource. And basically there were about 6 or 7 of these social science research centres who were kind of creating this research support service, and they didn't really know what they were doing, so they got together and spoke about it, and basically from a meeting around a table with I think 11 people, they decided to create an association, and then they called it the Research Administrators Group Network. So it was called Ragnet. So it started with 11. I joined in 1997 when I was the 297th member ever, including people that had left. So there were about 150 members at that time. And it was just lots of volunteers who were saying, well, actually, yeah, no, this is great. I need to learn from you. And what do you do about this? And how do we share that? And we started running little workshops. And then we had a little committee. And, well, if everyone put in a small amount of funding, and then it was about 20 or 30 pounds to sort of join. And we eventually said, well, what we need is some administration to run this so that we can run more events to benefit our members, but also attract more members. And there was, in effect, well, not an exponential growth, but a huge growth up to around the 3,000 members that we have now over those 20 years or so, and it really is sharing of best practice. So it very much harks back to the slides that you presented, Savita, in terms of we have this need to be professional in supporting research, because not every member of academic staff is brilliant at all the administration, and they perhaps aren't aware of all the funding opportunities, and so they need help and support to do that. I rambled a bit. Did that help or not?
No, that was very nice. That was very helpful, Simon. Thank you so much. So we have a couple of questions, and I'm just going to read out some of these questions. We have a question. If a person registers under IRMI fellowship, is it necessary for their affiliated organization to be registered with IRMI as well? Yes, that's right. The IRMI fellowships, well, institutions are hosting IRMI fellowships will need to be registered. Can activities and professionals of institutional incubators be included as part of research management? Well, the professionals who are running, managing the institutional incubators can certainly be part of the IRMI network. And yes, your activities are also relevant. It's just that with the research management fellowships, we have a focus on grant management. But however, as I said, we welcome professionals who are managing incubators as part of the IRMI network.
So perhaps it's worth just me chipping in on that, because yes, you have this very inclusive definition of, if you like, research management, and I think that's a really good way forward. Some countries take the view that actually technology transfer is a different thing, and they have a separate association or profession for that. But of course, it's a continuum, and if you do have separate professions, then there is a sort of an overlap. So I do very much like that very holistic, anything to do with supporting the research life cycle as a whole, which of course includes technology transfer.
Thanks, Simon. So I think if there aren't any other questions, maybe we'll just wait for a few more minutes and then close.
So while it's quiet, did I mention my survey? If anybody wants to fill it in.
Please go ahead. So you did speak about the survey, and yes, I should just point out that Indian research managers this year have had an opportunity to complete the RAP2 survey. So if you're a research manager, if you're listening into the webinar, and if you haven't received a link to the survey, please drop an email to the IRMI mailbox and we'll send you a link to the survey, and do complete the survey, because it would be fantastic to have responses from India as well. As Simon said, at the last iteration, there were no responses from India, simply because, well, we weren't organized and we didn't receive the questions, but now we have an opportunity to do that. So, and for all colleagues who have received a link to the survey, if you haven't already done so, please do complete the survey, because this is important. And Simon, would you like to add anything there?
Well, that was fabulous. I'll pay you later. I guess the thing to say is that once the data is collected, it's all anonymized. I mean, the data collection is anonymous, but sometimes people put in the free text. You know, I'm the director working at University X, and then of course their data can be worked out who it's from. So we have a very thorough de-anonymization process, and then all the data is released. So the data from the RAP1 survey from 2016 is freely available, and that's on Figshare, so people can look at that. The 2019 data from the current survey will also be released, and I think it would be very useful, particularly for those areas which are developing research management, to look at, well, how is our cohort of people different from a cohort of people perhaps in let's say in America, where they've been doing it for over 60 years, because there is a marked difference in terms of where people are coming from. So for example, for Africa, where again it's a newish profession, quite a high proportion of people have previously been researchers, or in fact are currently researchers, and they're operating in two roles. And so it's very interesting to see, well, actually, if we're now moving through that same phase in India that they were in Africa in terms of the newness of the profession, how can we accelerate to become more professional and actually become recognized individually for what we do in terms of supporting research, as opposed to being very much just a university functionary, because the profession is very different from most other professions in a university, or indeed in a research centre or in a hospital trust, because it's very closely aligned with academic staff. So I think hopefully you'll find the results very interesting and useful, and it will be more interesting and useful if you have some Indian data there in order to see where you are as a country.
And Simon, as I understand it, this is intended now as a longitudinal survey. So this survey will be repeated at regular intervals across time. So,
yes, I'm afraid so. I seem to have created myself a job for life, which is a shame. So yes, the plan is to run it perhaps every 2 years or maybe every 4 years. The reason for doing it in 2019 now is so that we can then present the findings at the INORMS conference. Because it's sponsored by INORMS, and by sponsored I don't mean funded. It's all volunteer work, but it's, if you like, underwritten by, in terms of all of the associations are taking part and committing time and effort to the task force which is running it. But yes, the idea is it will then become longitudinal, and then we can then track how the profession changes over time. And as I say, it would be particularly interesting to see how it changes region by region over time, to see if there is sort of best practice that we can help those who are just starting develop more quickly. So yes, thank you for that.
Okay. We have a question about whether the IRMI network is open to global RM professionals. There's an individual who's from France. This is intended for professionals who are working in India, because we would like to create a peer group, with information and events that are particularly relevant in the Indian context. So at this point, I'm really sorry, but we'd probably want to restrict it to those who are actually in research management roles in India. But please do keep in touch with us. There's a question on whether IRMI will provide grants to support PhD thesis. Well, the IRMI funding is really for capacity building in research management, so you might need to look for other sources of support. We have a very interesting question here, and Simon, again, I think I would very much appreciate your thoughts on this, particularly from lessons from the UK. So the question, let me just read this out. Is there a snapshot available for the funded research projects in India in the past few years, and which research funders they're associated with? If not, would it be worth attempting to produce one as part of the IRMI activities? To my knowledge, we don't actually have information that goes across all Indian funders, and this link between the funded projects and where the sources of funding have come from. And there are several sources of funding in India, both from the government and other agencies. So perhaps this is something we can think about. But Simon, if I might just ask you to comment on this, maybe from the UK experience.
Sure. So in terms of national funding databases of things that have been awarded, we have a partial solution in the UK. It's called Gateway to Research, and it's run by our government funders, so our research charities, and it's now under the umbrella of UK Research and Innovation, so UKRI, Gateway to Research. You'll find it under that. So that is information about all the projects which they fund. However, that's only about a third of the projects across the country. So most institutions have a research information management system where they record their own funded projects, and many of those you can access not so much in terms of a database, but in terms of lists of projects, because of course if it's funded, universities tend to want to boast about it. But of course there's 150 institutions in the UK, and pulling all that data together is not very easy. There are somewhat more institutions in India, but there are some aggregating databases. So I will mention one because it's free to access for most of it, which is the Dimensions database by Symplectic, part of Digital Science. So if you look for Digital Science Dimensions, they have, again, it's not all funding, but it's most of the major funders which they aggregate that data. I haven't checked the coverage for India, but again, they would probably be interested in including that in. So yeah, look for dimensions from digital science, and you can search through. I mean, it's literally hundreds of thousands of funded projects. Only really the title and so on. There's a little bit more information on Gateway to Research because it's a curated database. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. So I think we are perhaps reaching the end of the questions that have come into the questions box. To the community who have been listening in to the webinar, thank you for joining today. And if you have any further questions, you can always drop us an email at the IRMI mailbox. We can be reached at irmi@indiaalliance.org, and you can follow communications about IRMI events on the India Alliance communications channels. And a huge thank you to Dr. Simon Kerridge, our guest speaker for this afternoon, for having made the time to join us today. Thank you and bye.
Thanks, Savita. Bye, everyone.